Good evening. Thank you for joining us. My name is Joy Robinson. I am one of the Adult Services Librarians at Piscataway Public Library. I am pleased and just grateful to have Janet Reich Elsbach and Zellie Imani join us this evening. One of the other organizations I am grateful to is the New Jersey Council for the Humanities, and I'm going to read a brief statement of appreciation. Okay. This program was made possible by a grant from the New Jersey Council for the Humanities, a state partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or the New Jersey Council for the Humanities. Okay. So I'm going to take a moment to put the view properly, and then I will introduce Janet Reich Elsbach is a writer and teacher living and working in the Berkshire Hills of Western Massachusetts. She is a home cook, deeply interested in comfort foods of family kitchens all over the map, and a community connector focused on the equitable movement of resources, edible and otherwise, in communities. Zellie Imani is a community organizer and educator living in New Jersey. Zellie has served in diverse K-8 settings as an English, math teacher and curriculum developer. Most recently, Zellie has been organizing anti-Black state violence with St. Louis-based Millennial Activists United and Black Lives Matter Patterson. He is also a co-founder of the Black Liberation Collective, a collective consisting of Black students who are dedicated to transforming institutions of higher education through unity, coalition building, direct action, and political education that has initiated the hashtag Student Blackout movement across campuses in the United States and Canada. Welcome, Janet and Zellie. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm really grateful to the library and to the Council on the Arts for putting all of this program together. I'm going to start by dropping into the chat a link that helps you, if you don't already know, the origin of the land that you're sitting on as you're enjoying the program tonight. I'm talking to you tonight from, as Joy said, the Berkshire Hills of Western Massachusetts, but that is originally Mohican and Munsee land. And that link helps you wherever you are. You can pop in your location and find out who the original stewards of the land that you're sitting on were. Just to give you an idea of how the program's going to go, I'm going to talk a little bit about the book and how I came to write it, and then invite Zellie to join a conversation about community feeding and how we're moving resources around in communities all over the map. So writing this book started in the kitchen, in my mother's kitchen, really, because my whole orientation to food started there, as it does for many of us. I grew up in a family whose primary love language was food, and among people who expressed their care and friendship and all kinds of connection and celebration and so forth around a table. And that orientation spilled over into my own kitchen when I had my own house. And I think that how deeply food and community were connected became clearest to me when I started having my children. And I watched, experienced circles primarily of women gathering around new families and making sure that they were fed. And there's almost like a religious devotion to extending that care when you've received it. It's so sustaining and so profound, and you're so much in need at that moment. And that was when I first started to pay attention to the ways those things rippled outwards. If you'd received it, you extended it. And I made friends that I still have to this day from that. Strangers to me in our school community for our older children would show up with food when we had a baby. And that was just really a profound experience. And because of my growing up, but also just, I think because of my nature, food makes sense to me as an expression of care and attention, because everybody has to eat. I like to say, if you've gotten through something, an illness, a work crisis, a loss or just a long day, it's because you've eaten something. So if you're looking around for a way to show up for someone who's in crisis or having a difficult time or celebrating something, it's a pretty sure bet that if you show up with food, you're going to hit the mark, because everybody needs to eat. So when I started thinking about writing a book, I started thinking of community in ever widening circles. How do we show up for the people in our household in various circumstances, if they're not feeling well, if they're celebrating something, for birthdays and so forth? And then how do we push that outward into neighborhoods and school communities and beyond? And when I was writing the book, I also started cooking at our local community center, cooking community meals that are held weekly for the community. Anyone in the community can come. You don't need to prove need. And it's a really wonderful mix of people that come and enjoy those meals. And I've always been, to some degree, involved in whatever community I've lived in. I've lived here in Massachusetts, where I am now. I grew up in New York City. I went to school in California. Because in addition to my family's focus on getting something to eat at all times, we have a generations deep connection to service. My mother used to tell stories about her doctor father driving into the Black neighborhoods of Chicago in his off time on the weekends and the evenings to extend medical care to families there. And those ride-alongs with him made a really deep impression on her. And she and my father really devoted themselves to service in their way, really their whole adult lives. But after the election in 2016, I started thinking about these sort of disconnected areas of personal activity, what I cooked at home, and how other things that I was doing, it all started to come together through food. And I started thinking about the interconnected roots of all the things that I was doing kind of in a new way. And at that moment in time, the call to connect and to try to connect across perceived divides was really strong. So that was when I started cooking at the community center and really thinking about the ways food connected us, not just person to person, but neighborhood to neighborhood, culture to culture. And food is what lights me up and makes sense to me. So food was where I started a new kind of action, starting with that community supper cooking, and now looking at ways to use my family's land as part of the land back movement, as kind of both a form of reparation and a mutual aid exercise to grow food that's available to people. And it may not be food for you. Something else may light you up and make sense to you in a more organic way. But whatever it is in your life that has the same effect on you as food has on me can be really very easily connected to justice when you start to think about who has access to that, whatever that is, in a different way than you do. So pretty much anything that, like I said, lights you up or just organically makes sense to you is connected to justice if you start thinking about it in those kinds of ways. Who can get to this more easily, who can get to this less easily than I can. And if you think of yourself as someone who's unaffected by, say, the debate over the minimum wage, or if you're a person who doesn't personally face housing insecurity or food insecurity, you're still critically dependent on people who are directly impacted by those issues in order to meet your own needs. You're very dependent on people who are directly impacted, even if you don't think of yourself that way. So when your server is grumpy, or your delivery's late, or your neighborhood, whatever joint is understaffed, there's some part of your life's supply chain is interrupted. You are now directly involved in issues that you might have thought previously didn't really affect you directly in a concrete and practical way. And I would argue too, organically, rhythmically, systemically, you're affected by it all the time, whether you're aware of it or not, because we don't live in isolation from each other. There's a writer, farmer, and activist that I follow, Chris Newman, who says that individualism is what poisons our mind to make us think that stresses in one place are not felt by all of us. And he asks us to think about that individualism as not only the root of the food issues we're facing at every socioeconomic level, but as the root of all of our trouble in general. The sense of being an individual who's somehow operating in isolation from other people in a neighborhood that's somehow not affected by issues that affect other neighborhoods. He points out that individualism is really the root of all of our troubles. And he makes this really interesting point that from a food standpoint, all of diets that everyone is talking about, keto and paleo and Whole30 and, you name it. The fact that those things exist, he says, this is a quote, are a tacit recognition that the culture and economy that feed us are fundamentally unfit to foster a healthy existence. If you have to go and do some special program in order to be healthy, that means that the food that's generally available to you, whether you think of yourself as food insecure or food secure, is not intrinsically healthy. It's not good for you. And you have to do this special other thing. And he says that, if you think about, as I asked everyone to think about this, who the land belonged to that you're sitting on right now, who it belongs to. Originally, those acres once had an entire economy centered on the nourishment of people and little else. That was what people did. That was what they were focused on. Communities were organized around feeding the community. And we're taught now to look at that as kind of quaint and primitive, pageants about it in school, but that principle that the whole community is organized around making sure everybody gets enough to eat is anything but quaint and primitive. It's really essential. And he calls it the greatest loss that we face individually and collectively. He says the alien to us world of my Algonquian speaking grandparents was one where food culture blended seamlessly and virtuously with community, with healthcare, economics, education, conservation, religion, and political organization. The Indian mind couldn't really separate these things because effectively they're all facets of the same jewel, which is just, as a writer, that's a phrase that really rings for me. They're all facets of the same jewel. They can't be thought about separately. And he calls the course correction for this kind of crisis that we're facing now re-indigenizing, which I think is a great term, and notes that movement to re-indigenize is particularly strong in communities that are food insecure, which is the last place that the Atkins and Whole30 and paleo and keto people look to for diet inspiration. But in fact, what's happening in those communities is the more profound reconnection to those principles of how we're all connected through food. And what we'll be talking about in a few minutes, this idea of mutual aid, for some of you, maybe that term is a new one. I heard Zellie and I were introduced by a mutual friend, Andre Henry, and he just recently interviewed a writer and activist named Alex Vitale. And he described mutual aid in a really beautifully encapsulated way to me. It's the way we begin to take back control of what we need to make our lives whole. It's how we stop asking systems for permission to receive care and resources and start commanding and directing and sharing those things ourselves, which is just when you're overwhelmed by just everything that we're reading in the paper and seeing happening on the world stage, it's such a grounding idea, that this idea of how we connect to our neighbors and how we make sure that they have enough and how we share what we have is how I love that idea of this is how we stop asking systems for permission. This is how we take the control back ourselves. And I know I don't feel personally equipped or informed enough to reform society when I think about it in those, grand terms, but there's a role for everyone and a place for everyone. And actually, Joy, could you show that first slide, that colorful circle? There's a role for everyone in those kinds of movements. Movements need people in every kind of capacity to function. And one of my favorite examples is I have a friend who's a frontline COVID nurse working just insane shifts under incredibly stressful conditions. And what she does in her free time to unwind and to relax and to recharge her battery is she cooks for the free food fridge in her neighborhood in Brooklyn. Free food fridges, I'll drop a link at the end of the talk if you need help finding one in your vicinity. This is part of the mutual aid movement. These fridges are set up and they're just stocked by angels like my friend Jen, who cook and package up meals or put ingredients, fresh vegetables, fresh dairy in a fridge that anyone can access. Again, no proof of need needs to be demonstrated. Anyone can access this. They can access this without filling out a form. They can access it without narrating their need for it to another person. They open the refrigerator and they take the food out. And that kind of action it's a perfect sort of gateway entry place to start being connected to this idea of moving resources around, because you can do it whenever you want to. You can not do it when you don't feel like doing it. And I know Zellie has connections, which I'll also drop a link at the end to what he's doing in Patterson. There's so many ways to get involved in these things. If you're not a cook, if you're not a person who's oriented towards food, all of these efforts require drivers and people who are willing to write about it and disseminate information about it. There's so many different ways to get a toehold in these efforts to make sure that everybody gets fed. And I think rather than this is a great quote that I came across when I was preparing for the talk tonight. Helping, fixing, and serving represent three different ways of seeing life. When you're helping someone, you see life as weak. You see that other person is weak. It's a power imbalance between you and the other person. When you're fixing something, you're seeing that person is broken. But when you're serving, you're seeing that whole that we were talking about, that sort of re-indigenizing whole. That idea of service comes from a much deeper place than helping and fixing. And when you start thinking about it in those terms, I think it's easier to find a place to begin. And again, it doesn't need to be, cooking for 200 people at a community supper where you begin. It can be finding out what is needed in the community near you. And I'm sorry, I'm missing a page of notes because there was another thing that I wanted to read to you. So I'm going to I can do that here. This is life in the digital age. If you can stop screen sharing, Joy. Thank you. And I can get back to my notes. That idea of moving resources around into the places that they're needed. You could buy a CSA share for the food pantry near you if they have the capital to do that. If having extra capital isn't part of your way of life, lending time and muscle to a community garden is a really great way to do that. And I would ask that you think about that idea of food sovereignty, which again might be a new term for some of you. When you're moving meals and ingredients into communities, one of the things that Joy put together for the people who pre-registered for tonight was this spreadsheet where people could put in information about meals that they had cooked or received in a sort of a caregiving capacity or care receiving capacity. And it's a wonderful range of foods that are in there. And I could feel reading that list that each of those things was deeply connected to comfort or culture or how you felt growing up, the kinds of foods that I write about in the book. And when you're cooking, if you do choose to cook or share food with communities near you, I'd ask you to tap into that idea. That's that idea of food sovereignty and then sort of restoring power for people. If we are food secure ourselves, we take our choice and agency around food matters kind of for granted. And all too often, I think, especially this time of year when there's kind of a push to do food drives, people kind of clean their pantry and take the discards to people who are hungry. But that right to satisfy the particular cravings and the particular history of yourself in the kitchen is something that's like one of the facets of the jewel to me. So thinking about if you grow a garden in the summer and you want to grow produce for a community near you that has food insecurity issues, think about culturally who's there and what they might crave and plant a row of that. Another person that I follow, activist Rowan White, says, through the multi-sensory dance of cooking and tending the hearth, we enliven our ancestral brilliance. And she points out that Indigenous people lived and ate in harmony with the land, and that our current climate crisis proceeds from operating in an extractive mindset that's outside of that natural balance. And what we're talking about here, food sovereignty, mutual aid, land back, these re-indigenizing practices actually care for the earth as well as the people who are directly impacted by whatever calories you're providing. So if you're doing whatever you're doing from the mindset of restoring that sense of choice and agency and just self-care for people, those things in and of themselves are restorative to the earth. She is the one who introduced me to the term solastalgia, which was coined by a writer named Glenn Albrecht to describe the distress that is produced by environmental change, or what she calls missing home while you're home, which is another, I'm a word nerd. That's a word that I really like. And he also describes in a book that he wrote called Earth Emotions, the state of soliphilia, which is the joy of protecting a beloved environment. And I think we need a term like that for food, that idea of like restoring that sense of choice and appetite and excitement and capacity to feed your family in the way that makes sense to you culturally. And we need a word like that. So going back to that idea of like helping versus fixing versus serving, from the perspective of service, it's easy to see that we're all connected. We can't serve at a distance, and that impulse to serve emerges pretty naturally from the idea that all suffering and all joy are connected. So your full plate and somebody else's empty one have to coexist in your mind, not in a guilt-producing way, but in a way that seeks balance. If I have this, what am I doing? How am I operating in such a way that is restoring balance of resources to the people and the communities around me? And that, like I said, that list of recipes that you all shared, those are the foods that make you feel loved. And that's the idea behind, the book, and the idea behind everything that, we all are trying to do to move resources equitably in our community. And I can't remember who I was reading who talked about this idea that even in hunter-gatherer societies, those ones that were taught to view as so primitive and quaint, resource flows between different families were fundamental for survival. Not every family group could assemble enough for their individual survival, but everyone's collective survival was a shared goal. So it was just common practice to share what you had more of with whoever had less of it, and vice versa. And without those kind of interfamilial food transfers millennia ago, we couldn't really have evolved to the point where we are now. So that's all the yabbering that I'm going to do by myself. I'd like to introduce Zellie now and invite him into the conversation. His work is changing the landscape of food deserts in a part. If you're dialing in from Joy's neighborhood in Piscataway, we did a little geography lesson for me in the beginning of before you all joined the call. They're about an hour apart, but I would he's definitely changing the landscape of the food deserts in his part of New Jersey, and I would love to ask him to tell us a little bit about his own path to connecting food and justice by first asking you, Zellie, if you could tell us a little bit about how food figured in your growing up, like what was the energy around food in your family and your neighborhood?
So good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to be here and be in conversation with you all. To that first question, when I think about food, the immediate thing for me is, like, for me, food is sustenance. Food to me represents love. Food represents care. Food represents support. It represents memories, and it represents legacy as well. So when I think about food again, and I think about what it means to me, that who would I be? How can I exist without sustenance? How can I exist as a human being without love, without care, without support? How can I exist without my history? How can I exist without my legacy or these memories? And I can't. So I can't exist without those things. I can't exist without food. And food was such a central part of my growing up that I think, like many of you, right, even at no matter what age you are, there's still times where you may smell a fragrance, or you may walk into a room or an old store or restaurant that you went into before when you was younger and smell the same aroma that you smelled when you was younger, and just be brought back instantly to that first time you had this particular, donut, or the first time you had this particular cupcake, first time you had this treat, or the first time you had, this lasagna. And it just brings you back to so many memories, so many good memories, that I think that food is an amazing thing, and that it connects us in so many different ways. That for me, as somebody who lives in Patterson, that I can have the same memories as someone else because we went to the same restaurant and enjoyed the same food at that restaurant. And even though we went at different times in our lives, we may both have these fond memories about that food and have this bond because of that food. So when I think about food and I think about food justice and how it already connects us, how can it now connect us in a way that just not connects us for memories, but connects us so that we can create a world that is more safe and more just for all of us to survive in.
So if you could tell everyone a little bit about your justice work and maybe narrate for us, like at what point was food always part of that, or were you involved with Black Lives Matter, Patterson, and then began to see, I know a lot of organizations pivoted during COVID to add mutual aid and food justice to their work, but was that always part of it, or is that something that you began to see later on in your work?
I think that we started to pivot during COVID-19, like many different organizations. If you go back to 2020, I know it's real hard. It seems like it was like 30 years ago, back in 2020, when the pandemic first hit, and the governor, if many of you are from New Jersey, when he first ordered that lockdown, right? For some people, being able to withstand or endure a lockdown for a couple of days or a week or two was fine. But what about the people who were facing food insecurity? What about those people who, because they was now no longer being able to work, their checks coming in was going to be smaller or non-existent? How are they going to be able to now purchase food if they wasn't going to get any income because they had to stay indoors? And what about those individuals who we told to stay inside because they was the most vulnerable to get in COVID-19, the seniors, our elders? If we're telling them to stay inside indoors to keep them safe, how are they going to be going out to get their groceries? How are they going to be going out to get their medicine? How are they going to be going out to get, toilet paper? I remember, toilet paper was so hard to find back in like March of 2020. How are they going to be able to get those things? So that's why we had to start to pivot to be able to serve those community members. Because a lot of times when people think about Black Lives Matter, they think about us as a group that is protesting against police brutality. When in actuality, we're fighting against things that not just about fighting for the people who died, right? But we're also fighting for the people who are still alive. And we need to be fighting for those elders and the most marginalized and vulnerable, specifically for COVID-19 and the food insecurity it was facing because of this pandemic. So at first, we partnered up with a local IHOP because they realized that nobody was coming to IHOP no more because of the lockdown. They have all this food, and it's like, hey, this food is going to go to waste if we don't cook it. So why not us cook it and give it away? So they reached out to me because I'm already a community activist in my city and said, hey, we would love to donate some food to some seniors if you can coordinate that. So I was able to coordinate that. So for the first couple of days in the pandemic, I was delivering breakfast to the seniors, like 25 meals to a senior home. And then one of the seniors asked me on one of the days, like, hey, like, what about lunch? And I thought to myself, like, you know what, like, that's a good idea. Like, maybe we could do lunch too. So we worked out with some different restaurants to see if we can get, some lunches at a really, really good price. We raised some money so for us to buy like 25 meals for some seniors. We did that. And then we started posting it on internet. And then everyone on the internet was like, hey, what about my senior building? Or what about my senior building? And he was able to raise more money and was able to start delivering to a few other senior buildings. And then when I talked to my aunt who lived in one of these senior buildings, I said, hey, do you know like a couple of people who may be in need of, additional meals? And she gave me a list of like 20 women in her building when I was expecting like maybe 5, right? So then there was another 40 people who was delivering to. By maybe 3 or 4 weeks in, we was delivering to 200 seniors in the city of Patterson every single day. We had a whole system where people was dropping off meals to senior buildings, or literally like a food Uber, dropping it off to individual homes, right? And this is all because we wanted them to stay inside the doors, right? We wanted them to stay home. And if the government was saying they had to stay indoors because of the pandemic and everyone else wanted to stay indoors, and we wanted them to be safe. I know for myself that this was a very dangerous time living in this pandemic, that people specifically in the city of Patterson, the numbers of people who were getting COVID was spiking high. It was at one point over 100 people getting tested positive for COVID. And it was getting dangerous. People were dying. The people that we were delivering to were getting sick from COVID. Some of them, unfortunately, passed away from COVID as well through this pandemic. But everything that we did was to make sure that they was able to endure and ride out this pandemic. And the funny thing about this, and I'll end here, is that even when the numbers dropped down to 1 or 2 or 0 cases in our city, we still was delivering food to the seniors. And many people was asking us, why are you still delivering food to the seniors when the pandemic is over? And we responded, it shouldn't take a pandemic for us to care for one another. It shouldn't take a pandemic for us to care for our seniors. They care for us when we were younger, so it's up to us to reciprocate that in mutual aid to care for them now, pandemic or no pandemic.
And how would you describe the food landscape in Patterson? Is it what would be defined as kind of a food desert? Is it hard to find fresh produce? Is it hard to, is in the communities that you're serving, is access to fresh food an issue?
Yes, I would definitely qualify Patterson as a food desert where some neighborhoods don't even have, a grocery store in what's maybe called like a ward, right? Some cities are kind of, broken up into districts or wards. There's some, wards that do not have a grocery store in walking distance. You have to remember in Patterson, the median income is less than $40,000, and many people do not have access to cars. So many people do not have the ability to drive to a local supermarket, right? So where are they going to get their food from? If not from a supermarket, it's going to be from, a corner store. And we all know that a corner store or bodega does not have the diversity of healthy food that maybe a grocery store does. So if this food desert is existing and it has been existing for decades, what are we as community members who recognize it going to do in order to create something that makes them a community healthier and safer? And one of the things that we did as well, like you mentioned, was create a community fridge. And we put that community fridge in a place that was recognizably a food desert and some place that was experiencing a lot of gun violence and open air drug markets. We knew that those people in this particular area was suffering, and food was just not something that was going to give them that sustenance, but also that care and support that I talked about earlier, right? It's just not about having food in their bellies, but also love in their hearts. That having that recognition that, oh, not only are you giving me food to feed me, but you're giving me this food because you care for me and that you love me and you want to support me as well. So people having that, seeing that fridge in their communities felt seen, they felt supported, and they felt loved, and they did whatever they could to protect that fridge. So even if they didn't have the money or the groceries to fill it up, they was going to make sure that no one was going to mess with that fridge or knock it down or destroy it, because that food,
I was going to ask you what
yes.
the community response to that was. And I think it's really, I've seen that. I've researched them a little bit. I dropped a link in the chat. If anyone is one way of finding a free food fridge that's near you. I'm sure there's many other ways that those places where those things are gathered together, but that's one way to find one near you. And I'm so struck by this nurse that I mentioned, this friend who, she couldn't really be working a harder job at this point. And she pours so much into these beautifully prepared meals. She's not pulling 3 cans of soup from the back of her cabinet or, whatever's in the crisper and throwing it into the refrigerator. She's making these beautiful meals like we would make for friends. Many of us are not at this point able to have people over, and we're not socializing in the same kind of way. But if you're interested in my book, if you're interested enough to come tonight, you're probably a person who likes food, who likes that idea of feeding people, and you can pour all of that attention the way that my friend Jen is doing into these beautiful meals that she stacks up in little boxes and slides right into the Gowanus fridge. And she doesn't know who's coming and taking them home and enjoying them, but they're prepared with such love and attention. There's not I think we sort of think of food prepared for big crowds of people or food prepared for people that we think of in a poverty-stricken area as being like, well, they'll be happy with whatever and it's the absolute inverse energy. It's so beautifully prepared. There's so much. I say in the book, like, there's more than the calories are in the food that you're sharing with people. There's the idea, like Zellie just mentioned, that when someone comes and pulls that meal out, they understand that someone took the time to source those ingredients, chop them up, prepare them, put them together. And even though we don't know, they don't know each other personally, that person who did that was thinking about feeding the person who was going to be taking it out of the refrigerator that whole time. And that's sort of the magic extra nutrient in the food that we prepare for other people, even when we don't know who it is. We can certainly see that if you have a sick kid at home and you make them soup, those connections are really obvious, but letting that extend out a little bit, and not knowing who's on the receiving end of it, but putting that same care and attention into what you're preparing really makes an impact that's felt, in sort of magical ways, because you don't really know who's going to be taking advantage of it. So Joyce just shared another link too. So it's pretty easy to Google up and find out who's doing that near you, and also reasonably simple, if it's not happening near you, to find a refrigerator and make it happen near you. The one nearest to us is in Albany, which is about 45 minutes from where I am, but it's beautifully painted. They have oftentimes people will come and paint these fridges so that they're really visible and, are kind of a jewel in the community. I did an event a long time ago, 30 years ago, before the pandemic, at a bookstore in Brooklyn. And they're, very actively involved in, to the extent that the fridge is posted up outside the bookstore, and they can keep an eye on it, and they can, sort of take a little bit of ownership over maintaining it and making sure that when someone opens it, they're not finding moldy old sandwiches, they're finding beautifully stocked things that are nicely organized. But by all means, if there isn't one in your immediate vicinity, it's not very difficult to find someone who'll host it and to put it there and put the call out to make sure that it's stocked.
Yes, definitely. And the other thing I would add too is that because we was posting a lot of pictures online, and we was getting a lot of news coverage about the things that we was doing. So one family had reached out to me, like a really older couple who was also immunocompromised, and they wanted to do something. Like they were stuck in their house and they wanted to do something, but they couldn't participate in what we was doing because it was, getting in line, getting the food, and having to like deliver to people. They couldn't do that. But the one thing that they could do, they said, it was cooking, and they love to cook. So every Friday we came up with a plan that they would cook an amazing meal, and I would first like pick it up from them and drop it off to a family. And then once the pandemic started to like ease up a little bit and they got, a vaccination, they started now to deliver to the same family. And they was delivering to this one family for over like almost a year now. And he started to develop a bond and a love for this family that was able to know so much about this family that it was supporting. And the family was struggling. The young boy was struggling. But the one thing that gave him hope and I guess some type of inspiration was the fact that he felt cared for because this one family who he never knew, didn't meet before, was ensuring that he survived day to day just by giving them food. And I'm going to drop a link to a different program that is similar to that. It's called Lasagna Love. And what this is it asks people to, make your favorite dish, whatever the case it is, and they will link you up to a local, residency that may need that food. And you will just make the food, get that address, and drop it off. And similarly, if you're someone in need, you can just, put your address in, and then they will link you up with someone who will be able to deliver you fresh, hot food.
So getting back to that idea, that colorful chart that I shared, that if you have the capacity to produce food, but you don't know who needs it, guaranteed there is someone like Zellie's auntie who knows who needs it. And you just need to find the person who can connect those dots. If you're not a person who cooks, or you're not interested in doing that, guaranteed someone wants to cook but can't get it where it needs to go. There's a role for everybody in all of these movements to take back the responsibility and the power of redistributing food from where it's more abundant to where it's needed. So there's definitely a place for everybody and for everybody's skill set in all of these things. And I wondered, Joy, did you want to open it up to the participants to pipe in at a certain point? I did want to share some visuals that we have. These are Zellie, you can talk over the ones that have to do with your food distribution, and I'll narrate a little bit about the ones that you're seeing. I know that some people, for taking in information through your eyeballs is a lot easier than through your ears. So tell us a little bit about what's happening in these photos.
Yeah, so that's us getting ready to deliver food to seniors. And as you see, there's some flowers there. Again, we're
I
in the midst
love
of
the flowers.
pandemic.
I love the
So it
flowers.
was like it was Mother's Day, so we was able to get donations of flowers, and was able to donate it to the seniors as well, and that brightened up their day. They absolutely love the fact that they got flowers along with their meals. I think it's something that they held really, really dear to them, because again, they're stuck inside their homes, right? Remember, this is the pandemic. Some of them have not seen their kids. They have not seen their grandkids because of the pandemic. All right. So they have no interaction with anybody. Didn't really feel, this sense of love. And these acts that we was able to provide for them was that love that they needed to sustain themselves. So it's like one of my favorite pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that one guy in the blue, he was really, really safe with that
respirator. My gosh. Yeah. Next one, Joey.
Yes. The picture on the left is just us again, delivering food. That is Janet Reich is Gelati by Mike's. He has that ice cream store in Montclair, New Jersey, and he partnered with us because he had a lot of things he used to make ice cream. He gave us spare eggs, milk, toilet paper, and those things we were able to donate to the seniors as well. And there goes some of our, happy seniors that we was able to deliver to.
The next one.
Yes, and just, some of the ways that we was donating to some of the seniors in the city of Harrison. Again, some of these seniors, they were disabled, some of them were blind, some of them were in wheelchairs. I remember delivering to one senior, and she said that she was blind. She said that, she thanks me so much, and she wishes that she could see me, but she can't because, she's blind. Like, she would just really wish that she could see the face of the person that has been, supporting her for the last couple of months.
Beautiful. Next one. All right, so these are scenes from the community center in the town, next town over from me. This is a good friend of mine and her kids who joined me to prepare a meal. This might give you the sense that I knew what I was doing when I started this project, and I totally did not. I had the foolish idea that knowing how to cook and knowing my way around a kitchen was somehow related to making a meal for 125 to 150 people come out, kind of all the components of it come out right at the same time. And it's like distantly related, but it's not super related. So if you, these meatballs are kind of proof positive that you can learn on the fly and get get a lot of on the job training as just from your willingness to show up and draft people's minor children into helping you. Next one. Just the sheer volume of food that it required was always just always struck me. So I was always taking photographs of just like the amount of whatever it was that we were using. And also food is really beautiful to me. It kind of gets back to that idea that I quoted, that sort of the multisensory dance of cooking food. And when you get involved in that as you're cooking, I think the food tastes better to the person who's eating it when you've been when whoever's made it has sort of added that magical step of really appreciating where it came from and just the beautiful colors of it. And I think that really ups the nutritional content. Next one. Again, just it's really amazing how much food is required to make these meals happen. And these are just really photographs of me appreciating that. I almost always had help in the kitchen. And so this is not just proof of my labor, but the friends that joined me to make it all happen. Next one. I have a child who's extremely organized, so you can see that showing up in that tray of tomatoes. Everything was always much tidier when she was involved. Next one. Another good friend joining me to make food that was really meaningful to her, and make that happen for this enormous group of people. I'm always roping people in to come and join me there. And then a lot of these people go on to cook the meals themselves. So it's just an evil plot of mine to get people involved and hooked on the idea. The next one. Very organized friend, plucking the leaves of the cilantro there to make this meal happen. I love watching people's hands interact with food. So just the sensory appreciation of that. Next one. This is my favorite photograph that I took of community meal preparation. This person was probably 6 years old, as you can tell by the size small gloves on their hand. And their parent brought them every week to help set the table. And that's what they could bring to the project, was setting the table and making it nice. This was pre-pandemic, but still obviously a lot of food safety considerations when you're making meals on that scale. And I just love this tiny little person showing up and being involved in caring for the community in this really essential way from the get-go. So that's the last of the visuals. And maybe we could, I know some people were popping comments into the chat, but maybe if people could talk a little bit about what comfort food, if you feel moved to do that, what food speaks comfort to you?
Hi, this is Dashika from Piscataway Library. I'm the outreach coordinator. And my comfort food, I actually just made peanut butter cookies while we were speaking. So I just had one and they were awesome. I just gave my son one and his friend one. And my son said, Mommy, they are so good. I bought a new cookie scooper from Walmart. So I wanted to try the scooper tonight instead of using my hands. And they came out perfect with the scooper. So that's my new go-to.
I think Zoom needs a smell feature so we could all at least appreciate the smell of that.
Yeah.
I have gotten recently one of the simplest dishes I ever made, and it's so delicious. It's just 3 ingredients: baby carrots, olive oil, and garam masala, and you just roast them. And they are so delicious. And you can use them as finger food, as a vegetable, as a salad. It's awesome.
I love, if you've looked at the book, you know that I love cribbing comfort foods from all different kinds of cultures and cuisines. And I love it when things collide like that. So it was really interesting to see in the process of writing the book, looking at how, for example, rice pudding would show up as you went around the globe. You could find it showing up in different ways. And, what's polenta here and cuckoo there. And, how different foods just show up in mothers' kitchens in comforting ways all around the world. So.
Hi, I am. I make a practice of baking for fun and cooking for fun. And one of the things I missed most about the pandemic was, people maybe not feeling comfortable with home prepared foods. And so what I ended up doing, I just did it. I just had a friend come over. I bake, and then I individually separate whatever. I started baking breads in cupcakes, in cupcake pans, individually freeze them, pack them up, Ziploc them, put them in my freezer, and then call a friend and say, who's willing. So yesterday I delivered 48, what was it? I have a friend who loves banana bread, 48 banana bread muffins. So I started making a habit of buying bananas, sticking them in big paper bags and waiting for them to ripen, and then cooking these banana muffins, knowing how well it's going to be appreciated. So I just want to say I am very, very excited over this freezer idea, because I just said to someone, I need to be able to deliver food somewhere, and it would be fantastic to be able to deliver it to people who are actually in need as opposed to people who are watching calories. So I think that's going to be my go-to.
Zellie, I'm putting your Instagram link in the chat. That there's a link tree on Zellie's account that has a lot of information about how to show up for various opportunities in your neck of the woods, and I think not too difficult to figure out how to extend those into wherever you are. Oh, Kathy just popped another piece of information in there for people in Piscataway. Yeah, it's just a matter of a little Googling to figure out how to distribute.
Yes, and we also partnered with Replenish, which is an organization of various that send food to various food kitchens in Middlesex County. So you can bring non-perishable canned goods to either JF Kennedy branch at 500 Hose Lane or to the Westergaard branch at 20 Murray Avenue, and deposit bags of rice, beans, canned goods, toiletries. Zellie is right. It wasn't just during the first part of the pandemic that people needed toilet paper, paper products, feminine hygiene products, diapers. You can bring them to the library, and Replenish will pick them up from the library if you can't, get to a food pantry near you or to the Replenish site directly. And we are grateful to Replenish for partnering with us for this. Also, you, I think, dropped earlier in the chat, Janet, the Feed America link.
I think I didn't, but I can grab it.
Okay. Just wanted to say that for those of you who were able to get a copy of Janet's book, with the purchase of each book, 5 meals are donated to feedamerica.org. So we were happy to be able to purchase books and feed 100 create 100 meals. You'll also find the link. We can put the link to getting a copy of Extra Helping, and maybe give those out as holiday presents to folks, and you'll be having a dual gift, a gift at both ends.
I like that idea, a gift at both ends. Yeah, I wondered if anyone has questions for either of us about food or feeding people, or how to get involved. It's been a really rich conversation, but there may be things that we haven't addressed. I love the idea of thinking beyond what did you say, not people who are counting calories, but people who are seeking calories. That's a great idea to think about it in that way. But I just want to keep hammering that point. I mean, that photograph of the flowers. I thought about this a lot when caring for somebody who was dying. And this is true also, like new families with a new baby. It's sort of true at all ends of the joy and sorrow spectrum. When life gets really intense and full, and food is just something you have to check off, we forget about beautiful part, and we forget about both the hunger for the beautiful part and the nourishing part for the person who's preparing it. So taking the time, it sort of feels like a luxury or an extra thing, but it's really an essential part of it. And it's a thing, if you are caring for someone who's maybe bedbound or homebound, and thinking about the seniors in Zellie's care, what they're missing is that sense of community. Food isn't just how you stay alive. It's also you do around a table with a group of people. So any way that we can restore that feeling of community or the beauty of it for people. So not just flowers on Mother's Day, but, think about if you are stocking a fridge near you, putting some flowers in there, putting something in there that's a little bit extra, that's a little bit beyond the sort of utilitarian of, a meat, a vegetable, and a starch, but something that that allows a person to, because we come alive in the presence of those things. And if you're living an existence that doesn't include any of that, you're missing more than just the calories. You know, you need that sort of magical extra nutrient in there.
I think I know if anyone else wants to talk, I'm talking too much, but you know, it isn't just the calories too, just in terms of just the food, the richness of what you're providing, the smells and the mouthfeel and the way that the flavors blend are again an expression of love. It's an expression of the interest of the person who cooked it and the fact that they want you to feel something beyond just getting fed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's you know, when people have asked me about, oh, I don't know how to cook for other people because I don't know if they're vegetarian or vegan or they're, you know, I think they're on some weird diet or whatever. And I always say, if you've made something for them, whether they really, worst case scenario, it's something they can't or won't eat. You've still provided them with that nutrient of, wow, this person thought about me that whole time, that they were planning on doing this, getting the ingredients to do this, putting it together and bringing it to me. If they end up giving it to an office mate or dropping it at the hospital for the nurses to eat, you've still fed someone and you haven't missed out on feeding that intermediary person because they still have that magical experience of, wow, you were thinking of me this whole time that you did this. It's such a kind and it's such a loving gesture, and people feel held by that idea, whether they can eat it or not. You can't really go wrong with that. And this idea that we only do it in times of crisis, you know, that we were all, you know, thinking about essential workers and, you know, meals for hospital workers. There were all kinds of pushes to do that at the peak of the now over pandemic. Those people are still hungry and those people are still working and those people still would appreciate that gesture of being thought about. And it doesn't need to be, as Zellie said, sort of peak pandemic and, well, the pandemic's over, so why do these seniors need to be loved and cared for and fed now? Well, what the pandemic did was just open up a window on how much that need exists all the time. And we don't have to stop filling it just because the cases are dropping. And I just would leave people with that idea that this is how I know I get sort of depressed and feel completely incapacitated by the complexity of the systems that seem to be in the way of justice. But doing something just as simple as feeding a neighbor is pushing back against that. And it's such a capacitating thing to do. And it makes, it can really shift your orientation towards how injustice is showing up in the world and how much capacity you have to do anything about it. Because you don't really ever know the extent of the ripples of the actions that you take.
And with that, Janet, I want to chime in on that. That's 100% correct. Because though when the pandemic occurred last year, the school was giving out lunches and they actually was throwing it out. So I asked them, would it be okay if I take it to like the homeless shelter? So I took it to the next town over. And this one day I just was riding through the town and I said, instead of taking it to the center, just ride and see who needs food. So it was this one man. I pulled up to him and asked him, was he hungry? And he said, yes. He said, I just actually prayed to God for some food to come my way. And I gave him the big bag of food. I gave him apple, water, everything, and milk. And he started crying. And then when he started crying, I started crying.
And now we're all crying. That's a beautiful story and a really nice place to pause, I think. That's lovely. It's never wasted, you know, it's never wasted when you extend something like that. So. Joy, I don't know when we're supposed to end. I thought we were going for an hour, but maybe we're going for longer than that. I don't know.
Yeah, actually, I can't remember. I built in some extra time just in case people wanted to, share their stories or, ask questions or we wound up in a discussion, but I'm so grateful that we were able to get together and that we were able to share all of this, and I'm sorry, I'm still a little verklempt from Dashika's story. That was a beautiful story, and there are so many other beautiful stories out there that I think we're all going to be able to tell as we reach out to other people. Pandemic, as you say, opened a door, and hopefully we'll all just continue to walk through that and continue to connect. I see Heidi has in the chat, volunteering in these ways is also such a great way to build connections and build community. And so we appreciate hearing about Zellie's efforts in Paterson. We are, one of the other things that we highlighted, the library highlighted during when we were shut down, is we made sure to post on our site where the different food shelters were taking, were giving out food and necessities. The James O'Brien food pantry was one of those. And I'm gonna keep rambling because I'm trying to stop my emotions. But if does anyone want to add anything or tell a story about how they've been inspired to do something, or maybe add a resource to the chat that they're aware of, or a person or people in need, or an organization in need.
I did drop in there some of the articles or people that I'd mentioned when I was yabbering in the beginning. So those are pretty inspirational people to follow, and some interesting reading there if people want to grab those links before we close out.
I actually put those links in the email that I'm sent it to Joy.
Great.
Well, then I'm going to, if we don't have any more, if no one else wants to share, I will say thank you again to our incredible speakers, Janet Reich Elsbach and Zellie Imani. Thank you for your incredible efforts to connect to community, to create community through food and through love. We want to wish everyone a healthy and peaceful Thanksgiving, and thank the Piscataway community for hosting us in this way. And again, thank Replenish for being a partner with this, and the New Jersey Council for the Humanities for sponsoring this this program. Thank you all.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Joy, for pulling this together. Thank you, Zellie, for making time. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.